Right now is either the beginning of the end for Ubisoft or the start of a new generation for the company. What's happening, guys? Welcome back to another video, and today we're talking about Ubisoft's no good, very bad week. In fact, it was the worst week that I can remember for Ubisoft. Period. But there is a light at the end of this very long, dark tunnel that the company is currently in, if they can make it to the light. So let's start off with the bad news. Assassin's Creed Shadows, arguably Ubisoft's most important game of the year, was delayed from November 12th to February 14th, 2025. Now, delays themselves are never really bad news. It's always better for a game to be good rather than launch and need 6 months of work to get it to the level that it needs to be, like what's happening with Star Wars Outlaws. And that's not me throwing shade at Star Wars Outlaws, that's literally what Ubisoft said themselves. Also, Assassin's Creed Shadows is finished. The game is feature complete and bakes in everything the developers want to include, but, quote, the learnings from Star Wars Outlaws release led us to provide additional time to further polish the title. That's a roundabout way of saying that Star Wars Outlaws should have been in the oven a little bit longer. Directly from the press release itself, quote, despite solid ratings, Metacritic 76, and user scores across first-party and Epic stores 3.9 out of 5 that reflect an immersive and authentic Star Wars universe, Star Wars Outlaws initial sales proved softer than expected. Now, 76 and 3.9 out of 5 are not bad scores, but when you're praising a 76 on Metacritic in the official press release, you know that things are rough. And let's also remember, we're talking about Star Wars here, one of the largest and most influential things in all of pop culture. We might not be living in the golden age of Star Wars right now, but that's a name that a ton of people love. And I don't think that Ubisoft completely botched the game, but there's no reason a company of Ubisoft's size and potential should release anything less than a stellar Star Wars game. Definitely not a 76. But right after the shot, Ubisoft followed up with a chaser, saying that in response to player feedback, Ubisoft's development teams are currently fully mobilized to swiftly implement a series of updates to polish and improve the player experience so that the game will have a strong holiday season. And that's where this fancy new player roadmap comes in, which is ultimately giving some dates for bug fixes, improvements, and quality of life updates that are going to be coming through October and November before Story Pack 1 brings some Lando love to the game in November. But focusing on quality of life improvements and squashing bugs should have been what the last 6 months of development were spent on. The hard truth here is that a lot, if not all, of the games that come out today are probably going to be better 6 to 12 months from the day they launch. Whether that's a live service game like Diablo or a standard single-player game like Space Marine 2, it's become standard for a game to hit a point of being feature complete for the developers to get it out the door, rake in some revenue, and then keep adding an extra layer of polish to make the game really be as good as it can. That's a pretty big change from how gaming was 30 years ago, where if a game was bad when it launched, it was a bad game forever. You didn't have updates. There weren't No Man's Sky style comebacks on the PS1. In my opinion, that's a big part of what feeds into Ubisoft's reputation of making games that you'll buy on a sale. Sure, you could buy the next Far Cry on day one, but you know that Ubisoft games are going to be on sale 6 months later after the game launches, gets a ton of feedback, mostly negative feedback, and gets updates from the developers that make it a better version of the game that other people paid $70 or more for. Speaking of paying $70 or more, another great move here is that Ubisoft is moving away from the Season Pass model, starting with Assassin's Creed Shadows. Everyone is going to be able to play the game at the same time on February 14th. No more staggered releases with early access time periods if you're willing to splash the cash on pricier versions of the game. And if you still want to pre-order after this big delay, they're throwing in the first expansion for free, which is actually a pretty solid value proposition for the people that were already going to be ride or die on day one for the next Assassin's Creed. But let's not look past why this is actually happening. It's all Star Wars Outlaws. First, the optics of the Season Pass and early access for Outlaws were already horrible from the beginning. People were complaining about the Season Pass exclusive Jabba's Gambit mission that was locked to the paid Season Pass, and even if it was a totally optional side quest, it was still content that had been cut out before the game came out for that Season Pass. But beyond that, early access players on PlayStation 5 ran into an absolute nightmare when a widespread data issue with one of the early updates to the game left a ton of players with broken saves, some of who were 10 or more hours into the game, and they had to completely restart. That's enough to make someone put the game down and never come back, especially if it's a game that was already a 7 out of 10. Plus, that doesn't exactly make it look appealing to people that are scoping out the next Ubisoft game and see that it had the exact same setup that the botched Star Wars Outlaws launch had. Getting rid of the Ultimate Edition Season Pass upcharging was a great move either way, but after the disaster of Star Wars Outlaws on PS5, it's an even better move. But the biggest news might actually be that Ubisoft is coming back to day one Steam releases, and that's a big deal for PC players. And I've heard the arguments. Is it the end end the world to have to boot up Uplay and buy and play Ubisoft games. No. But it's an inconvenience for people that like to keep their library on Steam and like Steam achievements, plus it just makes something unnecessarily more difficult in exchange for Ubisoft either keeping all of the profits on Uplay or 70% of the profits on the Epic Games Store for 6 months before they drop the game on Steam. You know, where people are actually playing and finding games. Starting with Assassin's Creed Shadows, that staggered release model is going out the window. Shadows is going to be available on Steam and other platforms on day one, and Star Wars Outlaws is coming to Steam in November, roughly 4 months sooner than it typically would be expected to if you look back and compare it to something like Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora, that launched in December of last year and then came to Steam in June 2024. So just to recap the good, we have Ubisoft focusing more on feature-complete and high-quality games right from the start, ditching that Season Pass model and early access timing and going back to day one Steam releases for PC players. That's 3 big wins for a company that's had none for a while. Now, Ubisoft still has a long way to go. In terms of net bookings, they're predicting around break-even non-IFRS operating income and free cash flow. Now, I am not the financial guy that understands what that means, but it means they're making less money than they could have made. Which is wild, because it's a year that should have had the Assassin's Creed in Japan that fans have been asking about for more than a decade and a high-profile Star Wars release. All of that potential and still basically nothing to show for it. And the stock is tanking, which is not a great look, which is why the executive committee and board of directors are launching a review of the entire company with the goal of improving execution to keep things dialed in on a player-centric approach to help accelerate, quote, a strategic path toward a higher performing model to the benefit of our stakeholders and shareholders. In other words, why is this company the way that it is and how do we fix it? But they already have the answer to this question in their own press release, focusing on the player-centric approach, and that's something that might mean a lot of different things depending on who you ask. Now, Ubisoft gets a lot of hate online, and whether you think that's justified or not, it's just true. Anytime a new Ubisoft game comes out, there are hot takes flying about how people can't wait to play it in 6 months when it's $20, or how it'll just be another 7 out of 10 from Ubisoft. And the sad part is they're usually right. I'm someone who always roots for games to be great, and I find the fun in nearly every game that I play. But that's not what modern players want, and it's not something that they should have to do either. Brand new AAA games are $70 a piece or more, if you're getting the Super Mega Ultra Edition with the virtual keychain included. That's a lot of money for anyone to throw down, and with so many new games hitting the market every week, combined with people online that are there 24/7 to give you an in-depth analysis of whether or not a game is good, a new game has more to prove than ever. Even if it's something that's coming from an iconic series like Assassin's Creed, or it sports a name like Star Wars, they still have a lot to prove to get players in the door. And Ubisoft just has not been hitting that level. But the silver lining here is that despite all of the hate that Ubisoft gets online, people still want good games and love the franchises that they've made. Far Cry, Assassin's Creed, Splinter Cell, Ghost Recon, The Division, all of those games have kept people coming back for years. And none of those franchises are in their prime right now. But if Ubisoft is really able to lock in and focus on improving quality and delivering games that can go head-to-head, truly go head-to-head, with other gaming Goliaths of the industry, people will come back, because those could be great games. If you've been watching this channel long enough, you'll know that I'm always optimistic, to a fault. Ubisoft has great games, and the pieces that make a great company are all there. They've just got to pay attention to the details and take things to the next level, because that's what this industry needs now, and that's what players expect. But I would love to hear from you down below. What do you think about Assassin's Creed Shadows being delayed, those big changes to the season passes and Steam releases, and do you think that Ubisoft can really turn around and bounce back to being one of the greats? I'd love to know your thoughts. And of course, if you're new here, you like what you see and what you hear, hit that subscribe button for videos like this every week in gaming news shorts throughout the week to keep you in the loop, and I'll catch you on the next one.